This is a question I get in my comments a lot. What would it take for you to become a Christian again? When I was a baby atheist, I think I was more okay with saying, I don't know, but I know a good reason when I saw it. Then, as I learned a little more, I thought, if there was such and such philosophical case for Christianity, then I would convert back. I've been pretty interested in sociology and the cognitive science of religion for a while now, though, and studying that has really changed my perspective. If nothing else, the experience has convinced me that focusing on the philosophy of religion to the exclusion of other approaches to the subject is just terribly inadequate for understanding what religion is, how it functions on the individual and communal levels, and even how ideas within the philosophy of religion arise in the first place. So, I won't just talk philosophy and theology here, but incorporate my understanding of other approaches to religion. In doing so, I'm going to define what being a Christian means in a few ways and address each of them. 1. Belonging, the sense of being a part of a group that calls itself Christian. 2. Behavior, partaking in actions which belong to Christian practice like ritual and regular service attendance. 3. Faith, a commitment to the theological claims of Christianity even without a sense of intellectual certainty or high confidence. And 4. Belief in Christian metaphysics, an intellectual acceptance of Christianity's supernaturalistic or metaphysical claims. That fourth one is probably what plenty of you are interested in hearing my thoughts about, but as we work our way there, I hope to encourage you to think of religion as something other than just a set of ideas about the supernatural. Some of you might feel you'd only call yourself a Christian if you totally accepted specific ideas about the supernatural, but for myself, and I think most others, there's a lot more to it. Belonging. About 2 years ago, I addressed the fact that I do cherish certain Christian ideas from my upbringing and feel a certain amount of belonging in Christianity, but that I still don't claim the label because of concerns about tribalism. Near the end of the video, I made this comment. If I lived in a part of the world where Christianity wasn't linked so closely to radicalization, perhaps I'd be more comfortable wearing the Christian label in some limited cultural sense. Even with that comfort, though, I'm not sure if I'd really feel the need to do so. A scenario where I could potentially see myself taking the Christian label is one where it is directly related to the de-radicalization of Christian culture. There are Christians out there who I already consider allies in fighting the harm done by other Christians. If there was a group of such Christian allies, which I personally connected with a lot, and I felt that joining them would help me do more good for myself and others, I might do it. Currently, I think I can do the most good for myself and others by being the atheist but pluralist guy I am, but I do think there is real advantage to fighting religious harm from the inside, so to speak. My friend Dr. Justin Sledge from the channel Esoterica spoke very well on this when we did a live stream a little while back.
If you want to combat the more extreme versions of religion, being within the religion and making an argument on their terms, that they don't have the monopoly on what is legitimate for that religion, is going to be a far more effective strategy than throwing stones from the outside. I guarantee you all day, every day. Liberal Catholics telling Orthodox Jews they're wrong. You know what Orthodox Jews are going to say? I don't give a F.
Yeah.
But when other Jews come to the table and say, yeah, like the way you interpret that halacha, that Jewish legal ruling in a very conservative way, isn't actually grounded in the tradition, and you're only doing that as a response to modernity, now they have to play ball, right? Now you get to hold their feet to the fire.
I, in fact, already make change from the inside in my own way. Skeptic spaces online have contained strong currents of reactionary discourse on social issues for a long time, and they still do. It's kind of incredible how quickly certain rational skeptic men start behaving like evangelical Christian apologists and signing off on ridiculous conspiracy theories when there's a highly manufactured moral panic going on about feminism, LGBT issues, or people who aren't white. In response to this, I loudly claim the label of skeptic for myself. I don't want it to only belong to people who use it to feign intellectual superiority over religious people, minority groups, and people who speak up on social issues other than separation of church and state or the freedom to offend. Me being a visible representative of skepticism while differing significantly from many skeptic debate bros has provided some countermeasure to toxicity in skeptic spaces, I think. Understanding my view of this, you might see why fighting religious radicalization and other harm could motivate me to take the label of Christian. If I happen to make Christian friends down the road who I strongly identify with personally and who would embrace this kind of Christian identity in me, maybe I would make the change. Behavior. Community would play a huge role in this for me. If my prior conditions for belonging were met and my Christian community gathered regularly, that would be one necessary piece of motivation for my engagement in Christian ritual. Another would be the perceived benefit of ritual practice. It's important that the viewer understand that I see religion, and particularly ritual, as social technology. It is a tool which humans develop to facilitate social cohesion, cooperation, and manage anxiety. By saying that, I'm not asserting that religion was just made up by cynical individuals looking to control others. Rather, I think religion is a technology which humans have created sincerely and collaboratively, typically not seeing that creative process as invention, but rather as explanation of identity and reality. Cynical, manipulative individuals have definitely made up religious ideas and practices to serve their own interests, yes, but that is very, very far from the whole story. That said, in order to use a piece of technology, one typically first senses a need for it, and I currently don't feel any need for religious ritual. Honestly, I think I'm just more fortunate in my life than most. While I do have a chronic illness and have experienced some prejudice for various reasons, I grew up in a stable home, I have always had adequate medical care, and I got a quality education. Now I even have my dream job, which provides enough for my wife and I. I'm lucky to just not need much more than that right now. If I were plugged into the kind of Christian community I previously described, though, I could see ritual providing a social benefit. If we were very actively involved in political and/or humanitarian work, meeting regularly for ritual practice could help us retain our bond and cooperate better, and therefore be more effective in our work. I might be on board for that under certain conditions. As a Christian in the past, I enjoyed scripture reading and recitation, hearing and discussing good sermons, and meeting regularly for what we called fellowship, which is just hanging out with people that you like, I guess. Worship, though, yeah, not so much. It's too much to fully explain here, so I'll just link my previous video about the subject. But I understood worship as a tool for creating conformity and manipulating emotion without people's informed consent long before leaving Christianity. The hundreds of worship services I played along with while feeling that everyone around me was being unwittingly coerced into perceiving this kind of false and highly manufactured sense of God's presence really took a toll on me. Worship music now makes me very uncomfortable. And no, Catholics and Orthodox, it's not just a Protestant thing. Music, art, and architecture are used across traditions to invoke feelings of awe and inspire devotion. There's just a variety of ways to do that. I mean, you really cannot brag about the beauty of traditional art and architecture and simultaneously say that your tradition does not in any way rely on aesthetics to influence people. Anyway, I'd be alright with ritualized gathering, reading and discussion of scripture and ideas, but I'd skip the musical part. If my community didn't make that a problem for me, then it might work. Presumably they wouldn't, since they'd already be okay with me identifying with them without me even believing in God or the supernatural. So yeah, if I tried the practice out and saw significant enough benefit, I'd continue. Those of you who watched my last video might be aware that some research supports the idea that rituals rooted in supernaturalist or unfalsifiable beliefs have larger cognitive and social effects than rituals rooted elsewhere. I think this is true, but I don't think that means ritual doesn't work unless it's rooted in supernaturalist religious belief. Plenty of cultural rituals are not rooted in that, and we still perpetuate them because they help us. So I don't discount the idea that Christian rituals could provide a benefit for me without belief in the divine. Faith. Oh boy. Here's where it gets real. From what I understand about religious identity and belief, commitment to theological claims in religion is most often a result of social factors and/or a need for a means by which to manage mental and emotional states. Again, I'll link my full video about this instead of explaining it all here. Realistically, then, it would probably take a combination of social and emotional factors for me to make theological commitments. If the conditions I described for belonging and behavior were satisfied, that would help. But I think there would need to be something more. Trauma or extremely chronic stress. Remember what I said about religion being a tool, and that tool tends to be more effective when theologically grounded. If I developed a severe need for something to help me manage pain and terror in my life, that could create a condition in which I somehow, despite my well-explored doubts about the supernatural, provisionally commit to Christian theology. I get the feeling that some of you will find this strange. Like, you just run to religion if something bad happened to you? How intellectually honest is that? Know that this answer of mine is in itself an attempt to be intellectually honest. If this is really how I think religious faith often works, it'd be dishonest or egotistical of me to think I simply don't possess the human tendency to embrace religion when things get particularly difficult. My life hasn't been in jeopardy since I was a very sick young person, so I can't tell you with certainty that I'd remain an atheist if I faced that as an adult. That said, I'm not suggesting that the stupid cliche, "there are no atheists in foxholes," is true. It's not. There are atheists who have faced extreme trauma or life-threatening situations who have remained atheists. None of what I've said suggests otherwise. Now, were I to turn to religion like this, the way I'd describe this theological commitment could potentially be different than how I'd describe belief in a religion's truth claims based upon intellectual conviction. I might be transparent about my need to believe in this and how that motivates me. I have known very committed Christians who have said as much about their faith. I really do think those Christians experience a sense of Christianity's truth even while they admit they don't or can't know it's true, and are emotionally motivated to accept Christianity. This kind of faith isn't dishonest, in my opinion. I think it's an outward expression of a real inward experience. Discussions around whether or not people can choose their beliefs usually lack the language necessary to engage with the complexity of this kind of motivated belief. So, if I already had Christian belonging and behavior, then developed some severe emotional need, I might take on Christian faith as well. This would not necessarily be intellectually dishonest nor superficial faith. Still, it might be distinct from the kind of belief I'll describe in the next section. Belief in Christian metaphysics. If I were involved in Christianity in the three ways I've already described, that would most definitely make me more likely to fully accept Christian metaphysics and theology on an intellectual level. At that point, Christianity would be my identity and in-group, so I'd probably accept Christian ideas of any kind more readily. Realistically, I think this is the most likely scenario in which I take on these ideas. To be convinced from where I stand now, I'd need an understanding of a way to discern information about the divine which produces reliable, replicable results. I'd then need to see this confirm Christian ideas like God's existence, the existence of sin, a Christian description of God's nature, the existence of hell, angels, demons, Satan, the continuation of consciousness after death, transformation after salvation, the supposed connection between Jesus and all of these other ideas, how and why Jesus' sacrifice changed anything tangible, etc. And to preempt the comments that will suggest that there is good evidence of any or all of these things, and maybe I'm just not aware of that, I have encountered that supposed evidence before, and I'll try to express the methodological problem I see with so much of it through a discussion of evidence for demonic activity. I should have put that in quotes. Evidence for demonic activity.
How do you rule out dissociative, what is the term? Term that used to be used for. How do you rule that? Because from what I understand is that during those episodes, while they're experiencing some other personality is expressing themselves, the person will lose consciousness. Is that correct?
Yes, they dissociate. Yeah, look, again, it's again, Cameron, it's a matter of judgment. And it was a big point of the book. I go over the most common conditions that people mistake for a possession. And there's no question that people think they're possessed when they're not. So, for instance, dissociative identity disorder, which we used to call multiple personality disorder, people who are psychotic may think that demons are speaking to them and they're really hallucinating. Sometimes people with very deep-seated feelings of evil impulses inside, like certain personality disorders or sociopaths, people are going to say, oh, that guy was possessed. You have to rule those out. And all those conditions, dissociative identity disorder, schizophrenia, different types of psychosis, including organic psychosis, hallucinations caused by substance abuse, people with severe feelings of evil inside, and personality disorders, they all have very formal criteria. I mean, I'm doing those diagnoses. And if those diagnoses are more likely explanation of weird phenomena, but again, to return to the point we talked about earlier, I say to some of my colleagues, look, do you know patients who levitate and all of a sudden speaks perfect Latin or can tell you how your mother died? I mean, you have to make a judgment.
The argument here is basically that since mundane or naturalistic psychological explanations are not available for this phenomenon, it's reasonable to conclude that something beyond the mundane or natural is in play. As a starting point, as a hypothesis, I don't have much problem with this. It's what always comes next with this type of explanation that troubles me. Someone like me always comes along and says, interesting hypothesis. Have you tested it? Can you test it? And the answer is usually some drawn-out version of no.
But he says, and why was none of this caught on camera? This is a very common objection you see from skeptics.
Yeah, it's a common objection. It's an understandable reaction. There have been some pretty dramatic things that have been caught on camera. I even have some of those videos, but they're generally not they're not unequivocal. Now, why is that? Well, what people don't understand is this is not some scientific lab experiment. You're dealing with creatures. You're dealing with people who have their own intelligence. I mean, you really think after, in many ways, trying to hide themselves, that they're just going to perform for the camera? They're going to levitate because someone has a camera around? I mean, these are not neutral conditions. This is like saying, well, how come the crime committed is not on video? Well, if a criminal knows that he's likely to be subject to a video, he's not going to perform. And I'll tell you something else which sounds a little almost too pat or self-serving. I have had people come to me and say, I taped this exorcism, and it's really dramatic. Let me show it to you. And then they show it to me, and it sounds almost like too pat an answer. But when they show it to me, the tape is blank. Because demons not only have the ability to choose what they will do. I mean, they're not going to perform for the camera normally, but apparently sometimes when some of these dramatic exorcisms have gone on, they also have the ability. They have ability, and again, this is not just my pet theory. You talk to any experienced exorcist, they have the ability to interfere with electronic communications. I know it sounds like kind of always not a nice rationalization, but it's true. I've had people say I taped a exorcism, but when I tried to play it back, it was blank. So you're not dealing with a neutral enemy. You're dealing with an enemy who is very aware of their surroundings and can either interfere with that or decide, hey, I'm being taped. This is not a day that I'm going to cause a levitation.
When there's always some reason why the explanation can't be tested or otherwise meaningfully investigated further, it is not then a useful explanation. Anyone can easily make up a hypothetical explanation for anything. Instead of invoking demons, one could invoke paranormal psychic phenomena, or aliens, or a universal consciousness, or still unknown psychological or sociological phenomena. All those explanations have just as much credibility as one consistent with your religion until they are tested somehow. If we are willing to accept unverifiable and unfalsifiable explanations for things we don't understand, we must, to be consistent, accept fanciful explanations from anywhere about anything. This, of course, leads to accepting contradiction and absurdity. Arguments for God from design, as far as I've seen, always go something like this. This thing is unlikely or unexplainable through current understanding of the natural, and since my religious idea predicts this thing, that's evidence for my religious idea. Can you test that explanation? No. Arguments for the soul from consciousness go like this. This thing is unlikely or unexplainable through current understanding of the natural, and since my religious idea predicts this thing, that's evidence for my religious idea. Can you test that explanation? No. Arguments for the afterlife from near-death experiences go like this. This thing is unlikely or unexplainable through current understanding of the natural, and since my religious idea predicts this thing, that's evidence for my religious idea. Can you test that explanation? No. To really hammer home why it's necessary for me to have access to a different methodology than this, let's talk about Jesus' resurrection. Say I totally believe that Jesus died and rose from the dead. I discuss this with a believing Christian, and the following conversation ensues. It's absolutely incredible that Jesus really died and physically rose from the dead. I know, it totally confirms that he really was God's son and that his sacrifice paid the price for our sins. Well, some Gnostics say that the resurrection is better explained by the idea that the physical world is meant to trap fragments of divine wisdom, and that Jesus was sent by the supreme God who set an example of how to defy the evil creator God of this world and set free the wisdom within us. Why is your explanation different? Do you understand how extremely complicated their cosmology is, though? I mean, Gnostic theology really multiplies complexity unnecessarily. It makes unnecessary assumptions, so it's less likely to be true than my relatively simpler theological system. Oh, okay, then if we should favor simpler hypotheses with fewer assumptions, then I submit that Jesus was revived by some kind of medical technology. We have direct access to the reality of medical technology, so there's no assumption there. The necessary assumptions of this hypothesis are that there exists medical technology outside of our understanding, and that someone in Jesus' time used it on him. I admit that's not likely, but at least it invokes phenomena within our normative experience, rather than invoking an entire hidden reality complete with its own governing laws and complex beings. Yeah, I hope that this dialogue clarifies why unfalsifiable supernaturalist explanations aren't worth much in my eyes. Even if we could prove that the central miracle of Christianity did occur, we'd still be a very long way from demonstrating that Christianity as a theological system is true. By the way, I don't think Jesus was really revived by medical technology or even rose from the dead. I think it's a story with an origin in the complex psychological phenomena seen across religions. I can think of one other specific thing that might move me closer to Christian belief, though. Evidence that salvation is a distinct, definable, and detectable phenomenon that causes tangible change far beyond any other kind of religious or psychological intervention. I know there's a ton of anecdotal evidence for this out there. I've heard countless stories of people turning from addiction, crime, or abusive behavior after receiving salvation. My first job out of college was at a Christian homeless shelter, so yes, I'm very familiar with the narrative. Unfortunately, those stories are not compelling evidence of a phenomenon distinct from other religious or psychological phenomena. This happens in other religious contexts, in Islam, Buddhism, even Scientology. If Christian salvation is special, we shouldn't see similar results in other religious contexts. I've heard some Christians explain the evidence found in scholarly literature that intrinsic religiosity predicts positive social, moral, and psychological outcomes for people. They then use that to build a case for the inherent virtue of their version of Christianity. I agree that studies on that subject are compelling, but those studies don't serve any conclusion about Christianity specifically. Rather, they discuss religiosity in general. Examples of intrinsic religiosity can be found in religions of all kinds. If Christian salvation created such a unique change in a person that we could reliably detect it in their behavior, describe it neurologically, and explain concretely how it differs from other religious phenomena, I'd at least think Christianity to possess some very unique force behind it. I might think that force was likely psychological, but at the very least, I'd almost definitely think Christianity to have a better case for its theological truth than, say, Islam. I might even actively encourage people to accept Christian salvation and attempt it myself. The discovery of a pro-social, biopsychosocial phenomenon exclusive to one specific interpretation of one religion would be utterly astounding, and I'd be ecstatic to learn about it, even if it meant strongly questioning my current non-belief. I'm very curious what others think would convince them of Christianity. I've read plenty of comments from atheists saying, I just need actual evidence, but what does that mean specifically? If you watch my videos but don't usually comment, consider weighing in here. This comment section could really easily be toxic, but with the effort of thoughtful Christians and non-Christians alike, I think it can be a place that helps us understand each other better. So, let me know your thoughts below. Also, can you guys tell that I completely moved into an entirely new place for my studio? If I should get a completely new set, then let me know. I'm open to suggestions. Thank you for watching. I've been Drew of Genetically Modified Skeptic. A special thanks to my patrons for their constant love and support. If you want to hear more from me, then subscribe. As always, if you are an apostate in need, there are resources linked in the description to help you find community and mental health support. Remember to be kind to others in the comments, and until next time, stay skeptical.